like sharing.
course.
But let me introduce you quickly
Yeah.
before we start listening to you. So, Dr. Saray Stancic earned her medical degree from Jersey Medical School. Correct me if I'm wrong here. And pursued further training in infectious disease at New York Medical College. She was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis early in her career, and a few years later, she changed her diet and lifestyle. Dr. Stancic has shared her journey and expertise through public speaking, media appearances, and in her book, What's Missing from Medicine: Six Lifestyle Changes to Overcome Chronic Illnesses. So, welcome, Dr. Stancic. I'm super excited to have you. And
Thank you. And what is your first name?
Agatha.
Agatha. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
It's hard to pronounce it. I'm Hungarian, and my mom never thought that I'm gonna move to America, and I have to deal with people pronouncing my name.
I hear you. Well, I have a difficult name too. My first name is Sarai, so uh,
Right.
it's often mispronounced, and I totally relate. I understand.
So, how long have you been practicing medicine?
Oh my goodness, it's been 30 years, actually 31. It's been a long time. Yeah.
And when were you diagnosed with MS?
So I was diagnosed when I was a medical resident in 1995. So it's going to be 29 years. It was October 11th, 1995. I think we all know as MS patients the day that we were diagnosed. Most of us do. It's sort of embedded in our brains. For me, it was that day, and it was a very really crazy night. I was working in the hospital, one of those 24-hour shifts, actually 36-hour shifts. And I was exhausted and overwhelmed. And I finally had an opportunity to take a brief nap. And when I tried to wake up from that, when I was called to help another patient, I couldn't get up. I couldn't feel my legs from my belly button down. And so my initial presentation was really very acute. And MRI was done at that time, and I was found to have multiple lesions in both my brain and spinal cord. So, I had just turned 28 years old, and I was told by my physicians that I had very heavy burden of disease, so multiple lesions in both my brain and spinal cord. And based on those findings on the MRI, they felt that I was likely going to be in a wheelchair within 10 to 20 years. And I can tell you that that was really hard to hear at that point in my life. I was just embarking on, this dream career. Becoming a physician was something that I always wanted to do as a child, something that I really worked hard to achieve. And now, as I was just about to complete my training and begin my career in earnest, I was given this diagnosis. So it was really quite striking.
It was probably hard for you, like you saw so many patients throughout your practice, and then
Yeah.
suddenly you are in the hospital, and the next thing you know, they don't
Yeah.
put you in
So
to.
yeah, I mean, being a physician and knowing what this disease does to patients and experiencing that and managing patients, I knew what was in my future, and it was very frightening, and it felt like the floor had been pulled out from under me. It was very difficult.
Did you know anybody with multiple sclerosis at that time?
At the time, I didn't know anyone, a close family member or somebody, but I obviously knew patients that had MS, and they were patients that were relatively young, because as you know, MS is a disease that typically strikes at young people, right, in the prime of their lives. And so I knew many individuals that had MS that were in their 30s and 40s and and had advanced disease. Again, this was a period in time where there were no treatments. When I was diagnosed, my doctor said to me, it's unfortunate that you were diagnosed, but the good news is that a new medication has just been approved by the FDA. It was the very first drug approved by the FDA for MS to slow the progression. Obviously, we know that MS is not a disease that can be cured, but the management, the pharmaceutical approaches seek to slow the progression. So that drug was, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it was called beta seron, and it was an injectable drug that you would have to inject every day. And so, when I was first diagnosed, that was the recommendation that I start this medicine immediately. So as soon as I was discharged from the hospital, I was told to start beta seron.
Is that the same medication that got renamed to Copaxone or no?
No, I was on Copaxone as well. So beta seron is an interferon drug. It's an injectable drug. Copaxone is slightly different, but beta seron was the first drug approved, and it was a drug that you would inject every day. And it had obviously a very significant side effect profile, which is for me was largely intolerable. The doctor had said to me that the flu-like illness and the immediate side effects would improve over time, and the idea was to inject the drug right before bedtime so that you could sleep through the side effects. But I never slept through the side effects. I would inject the drug at 10 o'clock and then wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning with really violent shaking chills and fever. And it became a very burdensome. And within a couple of weeks of being on this medicine, I went to him and I told him I couldn't do it, that I just couldn't tolerate it any longer. And so his response to me was, you can't come off the medicine because the wheelchair is in your immediate future. So the only way to address this is to treat the side effects with other medicines, right? So when I couldn't sleep at night, I was given a prescription for Ambien. When I couldn't wake up, I was given a prescription for Provigil, which is an amphetamine. And then, when I became depressed, I was given Prozac, and it just snowballed into so many medications. By the time, within a few years, I was taking about 12 medications. I had a pill box, and I was in a really bad place, a very bad quality of life. Within 8 years, I was walking with a cane, wearing a diaper.
Slow down the progression, basically.
I'm sorry?
It did not slow down the progression.
No, it did it for me. During that time, I was also, the disease modifying therapy was changed. At one point, I was placed on Avonex, which was, that was a little bit better because it was once a week, I believe it was. But the problem with Avonex was that I developed drug-induced liver injury from it. So my liver enzymes became very elevated. And so I needed to be, that drug was discontinued. And then I think the last drug that I was placed on was Copaxone. And I had, and that was the medication I think I was on around the time that I came across that study that sort of changed my life, what I call my aha moment.
Yes, you mentioned it in the book, and tell us about that.
Yeah, so I think, I want to just preface this by saying that I'm a doctor, and again, dual board certified, trained in internal medicine and infectious diseases, and I didn't know anything about diet and the role that it played in disease, which I think is really quite striking.
Yeah,
right? That doctors.
it's so scary to hear it from you. Like I've been reading about it, that there's not really courses on nutrition and lifestyle in your program when you go to medical school, but hearing it from you, it's actually like
Right.
scary.
Yeah, which is amazing. And that's really been the focus of my career in the past 15 years, is to change that, because, I know how important it is. But anyway, so here I am, I'm in my office, I'm chief of infectious diseases at the VA in New York. And my secretary walks in and delivers the Daily Mail, and she drops this big stack on my desk. And on top of this stack, I see a journal, and on the cover, I see the words multiple sclerosis and blueberries. And and I'm like, what does that have to do with that's crazy. I pick up the article, and it was a small study. I mean, I'm a researcher, very unscientific, poorly controlled study. And, it was not a scientific study that could pass any muster. But I read the study, and essentially they fed a group of MS patients a diet rich in blueberries. And the authors went on to conclude that these patients felt better after consuming this blueberry-enriched diet. And I again, just thought it was silly. I talked to a colleague of mine that afternoon and talked to him about it, and he he laughed, and so did I. But that
What year was this? What year was this?
that was 2003.
2003. Okay.
Yeah. So, and this is 8 years into my diagnosis. I'm practicing medicine, but I'm walking with a cane or a walker. But you know, I'm just barely making it through each day, sort of surviving. And so I'm desperate at this point, and because I'm being compliant, I'm doing everything my doctors. And again, I'm walking around. I'm carrying this pill box with me wherever I go. So this study, then just for the first time in my adult life as a physician, I considered this question: could diet be playing a role in disease, and this disease? And so I went to PubMed, which is like a research, search engine for medical literature, and I typed in words like multiple sclerosis and diet and chronic disease and diet, and all of this information came flowing at me, and I was just overwhelmed and couldn't believe that I wasn't aware of it. And one of the first studies was a study done. It was actually a paper published in 1952 in the New England Journal of Medicine, written by a physician named Roy Swank. And in this article, Dr. Swank writes about the incidence of MS in Norway that has one of the highest rates of MS in the world. And he notes that the highest incidence is occurring in the inner farming dairy community, where they're consuming a lot of saturated fat, as compared to those who are living on the coast that are eating more fish and vegetation. And so back in 1952, he hypothesized that somehow saturated fat was playing a role in the evolution and pathogenesis of the disease. So he ends up starting to treat patients in the 1950s with a low-fat plant-based diet. And he follows this group of patients. He starts with like 260 patients and follows them over 34 years, and concludes at the end of this study, he publishes in 1990 in the Lancet journal, that 95% of his patients are still active and physically active. I'm like, what? This is amazing. My doctor, every time he sees me, he talks about this wheelchair that is in my future. And here's this hope in this paper published, 30 years ago. And how do I not know about it? How does my doctor not know about it? Why hasn't he shared it with me? And then it wasn't just that. As I delved deeper into the literature, I learned so much about other aspects of lifestyle and the role that they played, and not only MS, but also as a physician, what I could do to serve my patients who had heart disease and diabetes and cancer and other autoimmune diseases. And so I became just enlightened and excited and hopeful and joyful that this could be a path to my recovery, and potentially a path to serving my patients to improve their quality of life. So in 2003, I decided against my physicians didn't agree with me. No one did. That I was going to responsibly taper off of every one of those medicines on which I had grown dependent, and I was going to optimize every aspect of my lifestyle. And so I did it. I changed my diet. At that point, I was a very stressed young woman. Imagine, as a medical student and as a resident, the lifestyle that I led. I didn't sleep. I ate, garbage, processed foods. I wasn't cooking at home. I didn't have time. You can imagine what the lifestyle of a medical student and a medical resident is like. You're working 36-hour shifts. You sleep a few hours. Highly stressed. Everything that you're not supposed to do for MS, I was doing.
Yes.
So I was certainly setting myself up for this. And so now I became aware of what I was doing to myself and what I needed to change. So I adopted a primarily plant-based diet. I began to exercise daily. And when I started to exercise, I could do very little because my balance was very poor. I walk with a cane. So the only thing I could do safely was a stationary bike. And I needed help to get onto it. And I could do maybe a minute or two, and then I would be, that heat, when your body temperature goes up with MS, you become symptomatic. And so that would happen. I would get very numb. I would get, numbness and tingling in my legs. And so my husband would have to carry me off. And then but I went back the next day and the day after that and the day after that, and it took time, but I started to get stronger and those symptoms began to dissipate. And I could feel that things were moving in the right direction. I learned how to manage my stress. I went to my team at the VA and I told them, I'm leaving at 5 o'clock every day unless there's a patient emergency. I wasn't going to take on that extra research project or take on extra work. And I learned, I think one of the most important steps that I took was learning how to sleep properly. I was really dependent and addicted to hypnotics like Ambien and benzodiazepines like Ativan, which my doctors wrote very freely to me in response to my inability to sleep. And I learned how to sleep properly. I studied sleep physiology. I learned the importance of the environment, about my behaviors around sleep. And I learned how to sleep. And that was life-changing, to be able to sleep effectively, and the recuperative benefits I was getting from that. And bottom line is, it didn't happen in a week or a month, but over time I felt better. And I went from that young woman who was depressed and largely immobile to one that crossed the finish line at a marathon. And that it didn't happen overnight.
You actually ran the marathon?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. In 2010, I ran a marathon, but people say, oh, wow, that's amazing. But there's 7 years between my lifestyle change and then crossing the finish line. So I think the point here is that people, particularly here in the United States, we want quick fixes. We want things to happen overnight. Like, we'll do something for 2 weeks, and then if we don't gain results, we give up on them. This was a lot of work and a lot of commitment, and this belief that I knew I could get better. And I invested the time and energy daily to my recovery. And so, yes, I went from that to running a marathon. And I think, in 2010, when I ran that marathon, it was this moment that proved to me that all of this is so worthwhile. All of this is so important, not only for me, but for all of us. Like, on a global scale, we could serve so many. And it's not just for MS, it's for all the chronic diseases, all the idea that we could offer individuals education to prevent so much pain and suffering. As a physician, I've seen so much pain and suffering throughout the course of my career. And if I could do anything to alleviate that, then that's what this is all about. I mean, that's why I went to medical school, to serve my community and to relieve suffering. And it's not just the individual patient that suffers. I've seen the family that has to witness this suffering, and how there's so much we can do to address the chronic disease epidemic. And that's really and Chris, thank you for mentioning the film. I made a documentary called Code Blue, and that documentary really focuses not only on telling my story and some of my patients' stories, but also shedding light on this incredulous lapse in medical education. Like, how does not every doctor have this information and is fluent in this, and the power that lies in lifestyle? And so that was the impetus behind making the film.
Can you share with us where is the film available? Where can we watch it?
Yeah, well, it's on several platforms like Apple, Amazon, I think Vudu. There's several platforms. You can go to our website. It's codebluedoc.com. And there's, I think we have like 5 or 6 different platforms. Vudu.
And what's the title? What's the name?
Called Code Blue.
Code Blue. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Can I ask you if you ever took that study to your neurologist, that blueberry study?
I did. I went right to him before I made any decisions, because I really felt like I had uncovered something that he didn't know. When I went to him and I showed him all of the data, I mean, I brought him a stack of articles. It wasn't just that, that Royce Wank's work. There were Canadian studies, there were European studies. He said to me, Saray, do you really and he almost looked at me like he was disappointed, because he's like, you're a doctor, you should know better. You know that this isn't going to make a difference. And don't waste your time on this. And don't, what you need to do is just remain compliant with the medicine. But he wasn't living my life. He wasn't experiencing the side effects that I was. I mean, I had, for example, I looked like a leopard. I had injection site reactions all over my body from those daily injections from beta serin. Depression, fatigue, just my bladder. There were so many issues. And again, I'm not saying that today I live the perfect life. I don't. I live with MS, and I think one of the wonderful things that I've done recently is I've allowed myself to be a patient, meaning I think I've always played the role of the physician and sort of ignored the fact that I'm a physician living with a chronic disease, and I sort of put it in the back mirror and tried to ignore it. And I think in some ways, that's been a disservice to me. So I think most recently I've been like I've essentially sort of retired now, and so I focus most of my day. If I'm not teaching, I do some teaching and some volunteer work, but outside of that, I'm really focusing on those 6 aspects of lifestyle every day, because it's almost 30 years that I have this disease.
Can you share these 6 steps?
Yeah. So the 6 aspects of lifestyle, and there's this field called lifestyle medicine. Have you ever heard of that?
I heard it from the book, from your book. I never heard the terms together. And once you explained it in the book, it makes perfect sense. But please share it with us.
Yeah, so lifestyle medicine is a relatively new discipline, and its focus is to educate and empower patients on the importance of 6 aspects. So their diet, exercise, stress management, sleep hygiene. So really learning how to sleep effectively, addressing substance abuse issues, whatever they may be, if you have any, alcohol, whatever. And then finally is social interactions and the important role that they play in maintenance of health and supporting patients and living happy and joyful lives. So when we address those aspects, and the reason why this is so powerful is because there are several studies, there's a lot of evidence in the literature that shows us when we address these 6 aspects of lifestyle, we can prevent 80% of chronic disease, which is amazing, right? I mean, we know that we can prevent 80% of heart attacks. That's the #1 cause of death in our country, not just in our country, but globally. It's the #1. We lose about close to 650,000 Americans each year from a heart attack, and we know how to prevent 80% of those deaths. And yet, despite this information being available to us, we don't act. We don't talk about it. It should be like we should be screaming from mountaintops. It should be on the cover of every newspaper. It should be the headline. But we don't talk about it. And so a lot of my work now, although I don't see patients anymore, I retired from that just because it was too taxing. My focus is now trying to bring voice to this. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you today, because I want to give this information to as many individuals as possible so that we can ask questions and we can serve to change the paradigm and change our culture, right? The film has done a lot of that we've been able to reach communities all over the world, because it's not just the United States where physicians are not being trained like this, it's everywhere, and of course, the things we learn in medical school as they relate to illness and disease are, of course, very important, and we need to understand that side of human health, assuring that we do train physicians that can do those procedures, and we have medications that can treat disease. But my goodness, if we could prevent disease, we should focus on that, with a lot of attention, and we're not doing that.
Yes, so these group meetups are recorded for our members, but I was just thinking I'm gonna post it on YouTube and on every platform, because whatever you are talking about and coming from a physician, I think it's so important for everybody to watch this and see this and learn from it, because you are a perfect example. Like, you change your diet, lifestyle, everything, and look at you are healthy. And how are your MS symptoms right now?
Well, right now, good. I just had an MRI on Friday, a week ago, and I just got the results, and I have no new lesions. So I'm happy to share that with you. I hadn't had an MRI in a bit of time, and so my neurologist convinced me to have one done, and so I did, and I did get the results just yesterday, actually, and I'm happy to share that I have no new lesions, so that's good news.
That's amazing. Do you still have the same neurologist, or you switched to a different one?
I've had a lot of neurologists because
I'm
they
so
all
happy to hear that.
yeah, I think you have to, it's like dating, you have to go on several dates until you meet the right neurologist. I think my neurologist is tolerant of me at this point. I'm sure she's not thrilled that I am not currently on a disease modifying therapy. I'm not. But I never say never. I'm always open to reassessing things, but right now I'm doing well, and I'm grateful for that. But I always remain open-minded, and we'll see. But right now I'm okay, and it's going to be every year on the anniversary of my diagnosis. So October 11th, 1995 was the day I was diagnosed. Every year on the anniversary, I walk the number of miles that I've had the disease. So last year I walked 28 miles on October 11th. This year I'll be walking 29 miles. At some point I'm probably not going to be able to do it.
You can come and visit me in Long Island, it sounds like.
Maybe you can walk with me. Yeah. So, so far I've been able to do it every year, and hopefully this year I'll be able to walk my 29 miles.
That's amazing. You mentioned a stress management study in your book involving MS patients. Can you tell us more about that? I find it very fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I think the study that you're referring to was the study that was done, I think by the University of San Francisco, UCSF, where they took a group of patients, and it's a randomized clinical trial. Half of the patients were treated for 24 weeks with intensive stress management. So they had a psychologist that worked with them and addressed their streams of stress. And they had a comparative group. So it's always good when you have a group that you're comparing it to, right? And what they found was after 24 weeks of therapy, they repeated MRIs at the end, 24 weeks after the completion of therapy in both groups. And what they found was that the patients who received the therapy had less changes in their MRI, less new lesions, or what we call T2 weighted lesions or gadolinium enhancing lesions. So that study, again, it wasn't a large study, but it was a study that provided evidence. And this, anybody who lives with MS knows that stress is the worst thing for MS. It's like what I call kryptonite, for MS. And so as patients living with multiple sclerosis, one of the most important therapeutic interventions you need to introduce into your life, if you haven't already, is how to identify the stress that you live with, and how best to manage it, because it's such an important part of assuring that you can control MS.
Yes, probably for 3 years, I always thought that nutrition and food and diet is number one on the list. Recently, I realized that stress is the number one. That's what I have control for diet.
I agree. I think stress is so important, but the stress is, I use in my book the wheel with the spokes. So in lifestyle medicine, we often use columns to describe the pillars of lifestyle medicine. I like to use the wheel. The reason I use the wheel with the 6 spokes is because I'm trying to convey to the reader that it's really important that you understand that all aspects of lifestyle are interconnected, right? I think some of us are really good at our diet, but then we ignore the stress in our lives, or we don't exercise effectively. And so when you do that, you're not optimizing and reducing the risk of your disease progress. And again, we're talking about MS because this is an MS group, but this applies to all chronic diseases, heart disease, cancer, other autoimmune diseases, Alzheimer's disease. When we address all of these aspects, that's when we sort of reach what I call the sweet spot. Because think about it this way: if when you exercise effectively, you sleep better, right? When you sleep better, you eat better. I mean, your blood sugars are better. They're all interconnected. So the idea is to almost like create this checklist on a daily basis and say, am I addressing every aspect of my lifestyle? Where am I falling short? Where do I need to pay more attention to? And sometimes it may change throughout your lifespan. There are times where you're more likely to be aware of what you're consuming, and there are other times that stress might be the most important aspect that you need to pay extra attention to.
Yes. You follow and recommend a plant-based diet. Can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, so plant-based diet. So I don't say vegan or veg. I don't like to do that because then it immediately people have feelings about that. And it feels very exclusionary. And I eat primarily a whole food plant-based diet. So I don't consume animal sources. But that's not to say that you can't consume animal sources. There is no MS diet. There's the diet that we all need to consume is very, very simple. And I know people write books and they try and make it very complicated, and but what we all need to do is we need to eat primarily plants, okay? Because plants have very important components that animals do not have. They have fiber, both soluble and insoluble fiber, which is critically important to address the microbiome. Are you familiar with that term, microbiome?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So the microbiome is those 3 to 5 pound of bacteria, virus, and fungi that live in our gut. And we've learned so much about the health of that microbiome. So when you eat a diet rich in fiber, you're feeding the good bugs in your gut, right? And we want to have more good than bad, right, in our gut. Because and this is very important for folks living with MS or with autoimmune diseases, because we've learned most recently in the past decade how it is that what you put in your mouth affects your brain and spinal cord. Because when you eat a fiber-rich diet, you enhance the population of good bugs in your gut, and these bugs communicate with your immune system. That's pretty remarkable, right? So it's your immune system in an autoimmune disease that is attacking the myelin, that sheath that covers your brain and spinal cord. That's what MS is, right? Autoimmune diseases are diseases where your immune system that's supposed to protect you from foreign invaders, like if you come into contact with a virus or a bacteria, your immune system is like the soldiers that come in and kill it and make sure it doesn't make you sick. But in an autoimmune disease, those soldiers are confused and they're attacking you. So in MS, it's attacking myelin, which is the sheath that covers your brain and spinal cord. In rheumatoid arthritis, it's the lining of the joint. And, there are hundreds of different autoimmune diseases, and the target may differ, but it's the same mechanism. It's your immune system attacking you. And what we've learned is that this immune system is being communicated to or triggered by these bugs in our gut, which is amazing. And we didn't, Dr. Swank didn't know that in 1952. We know now this connection. So people will say to me, how can what you eat affect your MS? Well, now we know. What you eat changes the bugs in your gut, and the bugs in your gut communicate with your immune system, and your immune system either does damage or quiets down and doesn't do damage. Isn't that amazing? And
It's fascinating.
it's fascinating, and that's really relatively new data that we're just learning. So the key is to eat primarily plant-based foods, again, because of that fiber, foods that are colorful, those antioxidants, phytonutrients. So when I sit down, like this morning, I had a bowl of oatmeal, whole grain, right? Lots of fiber. And I had a big bowl of raspberries, blueberries, and strawberries. Just envision that beautiful, colorful bowl of berries that I consumed, and all of those wonderful phytonutrients, antioxidants that I consume that are serving to reduce inflammation in each and every one of my cells, and to serve that population in my microbiome. So, there is no exact diet. It is about eating primarily plants. And the other thing that I think is important is that we come from all different parts of the world, and there are different plants that are endemic to our parts of the world. I don't know if you've ever heard of the blue zones.
Yes, yes.
So the blue zones, as you know, are areas of the world where there's a concentration of centenarians, people who are long lived and healthy. And they're different parts of the world, right? Sardinia, Italy, Okinawa, Japan, Greece. They're all different parts of the world, and the diets are different. But what is common throughout all of their diets is that they're eating primarily plant-based foods, and they're eating these foods that are beautiful. In Okinawa, sweet potato; in Italy, tomatoes and zucchini. But you see, it's this this common thread throughout all of these communities. And what else? They live lives where they're surrounded by family and friends. Friendships and connections. These are very important in our health. There's reduced, because of these connections, we have reduced stress. All of these aspects, again, of lifestyle medicine resonate in these communities, and that's why it's so important. It's a great lesson for all of us.
It is. And I believe that my country, I am from Romania, Transylvania. At one point, it belonged to blue zones. But unfortunately, everything is changing so rapidly. And
Oh, yes. That's
yeah,
because the West moves into these beautiful parts
yes.
of the world, and the Burger Kings come in, and the McDonald's come in, and the
My
bad.
nephews are like, can I have a cookie? Using the word cookie. I'm like talking in Hungarian. I'm like, cookie, it's an English word. Like, how do you know
Yeah, how
cookie?
did you get
Like,
right?
no,
The
you
West,
don't.
the West has seeped in, and yeah, I mean, obesity is a huge problem in our country. Obesity rates right now in the United States, 42% of Americans meet the definition of obesity. We have these maps that are produced by the CDC every year. Every year it's worse. They started collecting data in 1985. When I wrote my book, so the book was released a couple of years ago. There were only 9 states, and well, I shouldn't say only, but at the time there were 9 states that had an obesity rate greater than 35%. Now there's 22 states. So in just 2 years, we nearly doubled the number of states, and every year it's worse. And to no end, I don't, diabetes rates exploding. We have about 12% of the population with diabetes. The CDC says that by 2050, it'll be about 30%. Our country cannot support that. Our healthcare system will implode. We have to act. We have
I
to change something, because
what is changing? I feel like it's the medication, new and new and newer medication coming out to treat diabetes too. But
exactly.
nobody
Well,
talks about
that's
what we are talking about right now.
That's exactly right. The response is just right. Research and development at a pharmaceutical company. Let's develop a new drug, and no, but we know. I just told you this study, the Potsdam study, that showed 80% of chronic diseases can be prevented, and we still, as you said, the response, instead of addressing prevention, we're just creating a new drug. There's I have a daughter, and so this is always very important to me. And I've had friends who have been diagnosed with breast cancer and have had very poor outcomes. You know, when I made the film, I interviewed a scientist. His name is Graham Colditz, originally from Harvard. He's now at Washington University. He's been studying cancer for almost 50 years now, and he told me, Saray, the risk of breast cancer begins at menarche. So when a young girl gets her first period, that's when risk begins. We know, and he discussed this in the film. He said, if we educated young girls and helped them understand the importance of their diet, the importance of all these aspects of lifestyle early on in life, we could prevent 50% of breast cancer in the future. That's amazing. Can you believe that? We should be in every elementary school and every high school in these health classes, talking to young girls about the importance of their diet, about the importance of alcohol consumption. Alcohol consumption is a big component of breast cancer risk. The importance of exercise and maintaining a healthy weight. We could do so much good, and we just don't act.
I do have a daughter, and I always say that me being diagnosed with MS is the best thing that could happen to my family, because I was able to change everything around me. I'm not on medication either, and I'm just managing with healthy lifestyle and diet. And because I changed, I'm able to educate my family and make sure my family is healthy and know all those things that we are talking about.
That's wonderful. I'm so happy to hear you say that. I often have patients say to me, this is the worst thing. And I understand. It takes a period before you can get to where you are. When you're first diagnosed with the disease, it's very, very difficult to ever ponder the idea that you might one day say, I'm grateful for MS. It changed my life. I'm a better person today. I'm a better mother. I'm a better doctor. When I was first diagnosed, I didn't think I could ever say that. And I agree with you. And I say this in the film. And one of my patients who has MS, her story is told in the film, she says that at the end, and I still keep in touch with her, that I remember the very first time she came to see me when she was diagnosed, and she was just crying for days and just heartbroken over this diagnosis. And she says to me today, even, now almost 10 years since her diagnosis, that she's grateful because it's changed the course of her life.
I have a question about diet. So how do you get your protein intake?
Okay. That's a really great. So, plants have a lot of protein. People think, well, yeah, I mean, lentils, whole grains, these are all incredible sources of protein. And, all kinds of legumes are incredible sources of protein. So, and we only need about 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram per day. So, but in this country, we've been sort of, we've had this misguided and misinformed that we need in order to maintain the sufficient amount of protein that we need to consume animals. And you really don't. And again, there are animal sources that are much healthier, right? We can choose lean sources, obviously fish over red meat would be a good step in the right direction. But the greatest sources, I was just listening to a talk given by Walter Willett from Harvard regarding a big study called the Eat Lancet study, and he talked about the power of plant-based protein, how when we consume a primarily plant-based protein, we reduce our risk of heart disease and cancer, and we've been sort of brainwashed into believing that we need to consume these animal sources. You don't need to consume animal sources, and the best thing you could do for your lifestyle is to reduce the amount of animal consumption on your plate. And I write this in the book because if you tell people to change everything overnight, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
It happens on occasion where a patient will say, I'm ready to do this and I can do it. But I was unable to do that. I know when I started, the idea was to reduce the animal on the plate. So, the way we think when we're eating is the animal is the main part of our plate. So if I said to you, what did you eat last night for dinner? Typically people will say to me, oh, I had chicken, or I had fish, or I had steak. We don't even hear about your side dish, right? What else was on your plate? Well, I had, quinoa, I had broccoli, I had carrots, or whatever it was. So if you feel compelled to still eat that steak, instead of it covering half of your plate, make it a quarter of your plate and fill that plate with more plants. And so what happens naturally over time is that you start to connect the dots that, when I eat more of those colorful, beautiful plants, I feel better. My fatigue is gone. I have the energy to do whatever it is that, to go on that bike ride, or to go to plan that trip, or to do all the things that bring us joy. Whereas before, and so somebody living with a chronic illness and is suffering through that lifestyle, through a compromised lifestyle, when they see that veil lifting, fatigue is one of the most reported symptoms that MS patients report to their doctors, right? Fatigue, about 60% of MS patients suffer with fatigue, and the idea of that fatigue being relieved, I think is a real is a wonderful goal for us. And so I think that, and another thing that people struggle with is weight. We know that when you eat a primarily plant-based diet, you're going to consume naturally less calories because there's less caloric density to plants. Like if I said to you, here's 100 calories of chicken, it's going to be a little small piece. If I said, here's 100 calories of broccoli, it's going to be a big dish of broccoli, right? And so your stomach is going to feel full when you consume the same amount of calories, but because these are nutrient dense foods, but calorically deficient, they don't have a lot of calories, right? Because there's and they make you feel really well. So you know, particularly as we grow older, we don't want to carry excess weight. So I think there's so many benefits to the consumption of a primarily plant-based diet that naturally, once you get started on that path, that you start to introduce more and more of that into your diet. And then there are other reasons why people might consume a plant-based diet. They may be environmentally conscious, or, you know, from somebody who is aware of animals and protecting them. Again, not to reduce those arguments, or that's not why I advise individuals to consume a primarily plant-based diet. I think those are important reasons, but as a physician, I'm trying to be as objective as possible. When I look at the evidence in the literature, because I don't want this to be subjective. When, you know, as a physician, I shouldn't be making subjective recommendations. I should be making objective recommendations based on the literature, right? The literature tells us that a diet rich in plant-based foods is optimal, and that's reflected in the blue zones, right? The Sardinians do eat some animal sources, but they're limited. They're the minority of their diet. The same thing with the Greeks, and the same thing with Japanese. They'll eat fish, but they also consume a lot of soy, a lot of tofu, a lot of vegetables, a lot of sweet potato, and again, you know, that's where they're reaping the benefit.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you. Do you take any supplements? And if you do, which one do you recommend for us with MS?
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of supplements. I think that if you consume a healthy diet, you're probably going to get everything you need. Certainly with that, I would just add that vitamin D is important for MS patients, and so in the winter months, I'll take a vitamin D supplement. I'll take 2,000 international units a day. And then if you're strictly plant-based, so you're not consuming any animal sources, vitamin B12 would be recommended.
Okay, thank you. And we have another question here. What is the most important for a new diagnosed person? Somebody who was just newly diagnosed.
Yeah, I think I think back to when I was first diagnosed, is seeking support and getting as much education and understanding the disease. Because and it's important to get reliable sources of information, because regrettably, there's a lot of bad information on the internet. So we can go to Google and type in MS and get a lot of bad information. So I think it's important that you find a good neurologist that you trust, and it may not be the first person that you go see. It might be the third or fourth, but ask questions of your neurologist. Make sure that they value and understand the importance of lifestyle. There are neurologists that see value in lifestyle, and I mean, if you're a neurologist in this day and age, I mean, it was different 30 years ago when I was diagnosed. In this day and age, if your neurologist says diet has nothing to do with your MS and neither does lifestyle, then go see another neurologist, because of course it does. And there's so much evidence to show that that's true. Now, as far as the disease modifying therapy, they're obviously going to talk to you about that, because that's the recommendation and that's the standard of care. And I would expect that most neurologists would make those recommendations. But at the end of the day, as an individual, you're going to make that decision as to what is best for you. And again, I'm not against disease modifying therapy. I think each patient is an individual and has to weigh out the risk benefit of their decision. but having a good neurologist that you trust is important. And then if you don't have a physician, you might want to speak to a physician that is trained in lifestyle medicine. There are many that are board certified now across the country. When I first went to the lifestyle medicine conference, I think it was 2011, there might have been 80 doctors in the room. Last time we had a conference, I think there were thousands, so this is definitely,
I love
yeah,
that.
it's spreading all across the country. And it's not just the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, it's the Brazilian College of Lifestyle Medicine, it's the Italian College of Lifestyle Medicine, it's the Canadian College of Lifestyle. It's all over the world because doctors want their patients to get better. We want to have happy, healthy, and joyful patients. We just were not taught this way. So when patients say to me, "Oh my God, my doctor, he doesn't talk or she doesn't tell me anything about this," it's not his or her fault. It said they weren't taught this. So that's been the focus of my career, is making sure that we change this. And so I'm really proud because I've trained a lot of young doctors, and now I see them out in the world doing wonderful things and changing their communities and treating patients with this new approach to healthcare, which puts prevention first. And that's wonderful, but we have a lot of work to do to change this.
And thank you for all the work that you are doing. One more list. So sorry. I thought my computer is on. Anyway, have you ever had fear of the future, and do you have it now?
I think no, I don't think I have it now. I think maybe when I was first diagnosed, when I was feeling very unwell, and my doctor told me about the wheelchair. I don't think I have fear. I think the one thing that I've learned that's been most powerful to me is to accept whatever comes in my life, because I think when we resist, that's when we suffer. So regardless of what challenges life brings to me, I accept them and I do the best I can under those circumstances. And that's a lesson that I've learned over the years, and it's served me. I think when you switch that that approach, when you start to see the world in that way, then you're just happier. If you don't get a job that you wanted, or you don't, that job was not meant to be for you, or that that situation was not right for you. It's okay, let it go, and something else is coming in your future. And so with MS, that was it. When it happened, it's not fair. I'm so angry. I've worked so hard to become a doctor. I've made so many sacrifices, and now this is what I get. The minute I said to myself, it's okay, this is what you've got, and now you've got to make the best of it. And so I think I hope I've done the best of it. I hope that my book serves people. I hope that the film urges academia to change. And so if I've done that, then MS, there's a reason why it came into my life, and so you accept and you serve.
Thank you. That was beautiful. And thank you for serving us and sharing all this with us.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I got to see Chris.
And he is here because of you, so I get to see him too. That's the
he's wonderful, and he's doing so many amazing things. I'm so proud of him.
Do you know what? I've wanted to jump up and dance around my office, really, just hearing you speak, and how you are so articulate, and you're amazing, and I've devoted the rest of my life to actually creating these healthier, happier humans in the UK and across the world, really.
That's so wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
I hope everybody's gonna have a wonderful weekend. Thank you again for coming and talking. And I think you just made my day much better, and listening
so much.
to you. And
well, it's lovely to know you're not too far from me. You're in Long Island, so maybe someday we can actually meet in person.
That would be amazing. Do you have any? Yes, this was actually one of my question on the list. Do you have
Yeah.
any MS friends, or are you part of any communities?
No, I'm actually not. And I mentioned that I've retired. I'm not practicing anymore. So now I'm ready to be a patient MS friend. So well, Chris is my friend, so we have that already. So yeah, I'm really interested. I don't know if you're familiar with, there's a recent podcast that was just started called the Messy Podcast by Christina
Yes.
Appleton.
What do you think about that?
Yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting. And I've listened to a couple of them and I almost wish I could chime in and talk to them because I want to help them.
I'm like, can somebody?
Yeah.
Please, I
So
would
I
love
was
that.
starting to think, I was talking to a friend of mine, who said to me, maybe we'll start a podcast for MS patients, with a little bit of a different,
You know what's the problem? They have such a big audience because they are celebrities, and we
course,
don't.
yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's okay, and I think it's great. I think it's important. They're bringing voice to MS, but I also want to be able to. I get it, they're celebrities, but I also want them to be able to relay how to help people living with MS. And right now, I just don't think they're equipped to do that. I mean, I think it's great that they're sharing their stories, and particularly Jamie Lynn, who I believe has had MS for many years, and she's lovely, and she's helping. I think Christina, who's more recently diagnosed. But I just hope and pray that they're also getting help from a professional who can help them manage some of these aspects of lifestyle that we talked about. And I mean, I think it's great whenever you have somebody talking about MS. It's a good thing because at least it
Yes.
becomes it's out there, and then we can all help each other. So maybe someday we can join the Messy podcast and talk to them. We could bring Chris and share our perspective with them, and we can all help each other. Because you know what, celebrity, doctor, doesn't matter. We all in the same boat, and we all want to help each other. We want, in the end of the day, I want them to be happy and healthy, and as I do for everyone.
Very true. Yes. Well
All
said.
right.
Thank you so much. Have a great weekend, everybody. I hope I see you guys soon.
Bye. Take care.
Bye.